When President Ibrahim Traoré delivered an emotional tribute, no one expected Denzel Washington, the legendary actor known for his strength and composure, to be left speechless. But as the words sank in, Denzel's voice trembled with emotion, revealing a side of him the world rarely sees. This unforgettable moment of respect and truth has already captured millions of hearts online, reminding us of the deep power of authenticity and connection. The auditorium was packed, cameras flashed, microphones buzzed, and the world waited. It was supposed to be a short gathering, just another evening tribute, but no one knew that history was about to be written. President Ibrahim Traoré stepped up to the podium. His voice was calm, steady, and warm, carrying the weight of both truth and humility. In the front row sat Denzel Washington, the legendary actor known for his strength, composure, and commanding presence, crossed his arms, his face unreadable. Traoré began with a simple sentence. "We are not here tonight just to honor a man's achievements, but to honor his humanity." The room grew quiet. Even the cameras seemed to pause as the president spoke about dignity, legacy, and the invisible battles men fight behind their smiles. Denzel's posture shifted. He leaned forward, his jaw tightened. And for the first time, in a long time, the world would see him vulnerable. The audience expected political language, but Traoré didn't speak like a politician. He spoke like a son, a brother, a man who had walked through hardship and refused to lose his humanity. "The strength of a man," Traoré said, his eyes sweeping, "across the room is not measured by the applause he receives, but by the kindness he gives when no one is watching." Denzel's chest rose and fell heavily. He glanced down, blinking fast, as though fighting a storm within. Traoré's words were not about power. They were about legacy, truth, and the courage to remain human in a world that demands masks. For a brief moment, the spotlight moved from the stage to Denzel. A camera captured his trembling hand covering his mouth. The image flashed across screens worldwide, though no one yet understood what he was feeling. But Denzel knew the words had pierced him. People always said Denzel Washington was unshakable in his movies, in interviews, even in personal appearances. He stood tall, firm, and composed. But that night, the walls began to fall. As Traoré spoke about the sacrifices men make quietly, the regrets they carry alone, and the dignity they preserve even in silence. Denzel's eyes welled up. He tried to swallow it back. He looked to the ceiling, took a deep breath, even forced a smile. But the truth had already found him. A hush fell over the hall as Denzel's lips parted, and he whispered almost to himself, "My God?" A ripple went through the audience. No one had ever seen him like this, not in public, and then, with his voice trembling, he finally said, "I wasn't ready for this." The world leaned in. The night had only just begun. It felt as though the auditorium had forgotten how to breathe. Every word President Traoré spoke landed with the weight of truth. Yet the gentleness of compassion, true greatness, he said softly, is not in how high we rise, but in how we lift others as we climb. The camera panned to Denzel again, his lips pressed together tightly, his eyes glistened. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as though the words were too heavy to meet head-on. People in the audience exchanged glances. No one dared speak. Not even the sound of shuffling papers could be heard. For decades, the world had seen Denzel as a giant of strength. But in that moment, they saw the man behind the legend. President Traoré paused, scanning the room. His gaze seemed to rest directly on Denzel. The silence became unbearable. And then a single tear slipped down Denzel's cheek. The tear did not go unnoticed. The giant had cracked. President Traoré, instead of continuing with rehearsed lines, set aside his notes. He spoke freely from the deepest place of his heart. "Brother," he said, his voice steady but emotional, "our strength is not in hiding our pain. It is in daring to show it." The word brother echoed in the hall. Denzel's head lifted slowly, eyes meeting the president's. For a brief moment, it felt as though the two men were the only ones in the room. Denzel's throat tightened. He tried to speak, but no sound came. He pressed his hands together, bowed his head, and breathed deeply as though steadying himself. Traoré continued, "You have carried the world on your shoulders with grace. Tonight, let us carry you." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and then applause, not loud but gentle, respectful. Denzel closed his eyes. His chest trembled. He whispered, barely audible, "Thank you." Clips of the scene began spreading online almost instantly. Phones discreetly recorded the trembling in Denzel's voice, the softness in Trey's words, the raw humanity of it all. But inside that room, something far greater was happening. President Traoré stepped down from the podium. The crowd gasped as he walked across the stage, not to the cameras, not to the reporters, but straight toward Denzel. He placed a hand gently on Denzel's shoulder. "You don't have to be strong alone," Traoré said quietly. The two men locked eyes. Denzel, overwhelmed, covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. The crowd sat frozen, watching a legend break down, not in shame, but in humanity. A few seats away, a woman began to cry softly. Soon, others followed. The room had become a place of healing, not just for Denzel, but for everyone who carried unspoken burdens. For the first time in years, the world saw Denzel Washington not as an untouchable icon, but as a man, human, and the night was far from over. Though millions would later watch the clips online, the cameras couldn't truly capture the weight of that moment. President Traoré kept his hand on Denzel's shoulder, steady and firm, almost as though anchoring. Him, the silence stretched on, but it wasn't awkward. It was sacred. The audience leaned in, hearts racing. Reporters who usually fought for headlines found themselves too moved to write. Even the security guards standing by the doors had tears glistening in their eyes. Finally, Denzel lowered his hands from his face. His eyes were red, his jaw trembling. The room braced for what he might say, but all he managed was a hoarse whisper. "You don't know how much I needed this." Traoré nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Denzel's. "Sometimes," he replied softly, "the strongest among us are the ones most in need of healing." The room exhaled together, as if releasing a burden they didn't know they were carrying. And at that instant, the world saw something beyond celebrity or politics. They saw humanity. Denzel straightened his back, clearly wrestling with whether to continue. For years, he had been the rock, the unshakable figure everyone admired. But President Traoré's words had broken through walls even Hollywood couldn't touch. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice low and uneven. "I have spent a lifetime teaching strength," he began. "But there are nights I sit alone, feeling like I'm failing the very people who look up to me." The crowd stirred. This was not the Denzel the world usually saw. This was raw, unfiltered truth. His eyes darted toward Traoré as though asking for silent permission to continue. Traoré gave a small, reassuring nod. "Hearing you tonight, it reminded me that even I deserve to rest. Even I deserve to be carried sometimes." A hush fell again. People wiped their eyes quietly. Phones shook in trembling hands as the moment was recorded. For the first time in a long time, Denzel wasn't performing. He was simply being. Within hours, the internet exploded. Clips of Denzel's trembling voice spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Hashtags trended worldwide. But inside that auditorium, the weight of the moment hadn't yet lifted. President Traoré returned to the stage, his expression humble, almost as though unaware of the tidal wave he had just unleashed. "My brothers and sisters," he said, scanning the faces before him. "Let tonight remind us all, our humanity is our greatest strength. It is okay to weep. It is okay to need each other." The applause this time was louder, longer, almost thunderous. But it wasn't the applause of entertainment. It was the applause of souls finding connection. Denzel, still emotional, rose to his feet. He clasped Traoré's hand with both of his, holding it tightly. The camera zoomed in, and the world would never forget the image of two men. One, a Hollywood legend, the other, a young African leader, standing together, bound not by fame or politics, but by truth. The night had only just begun to reveal its power. When the applause finally faded, a heavy silence remained. People shifted, in their seats, almost afraid to speak, as though words would break the fragile bond the room now shared. Denzel sat down, but his hands kept trembling. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor, his chest rising and falling with deep, uneven breaths. President Traoré, calm yet visibly moved, leaned slightly toward him and whispered something the microphones didn't catch. For a moment, Denzel closed his eyes. Then he placed a hand over his heart and gave a small nod. The gesture spoke louder than words. "I hear you. I feel you. Thank you." A young woman sitting in the back later described it online. It felt like the entire room was holding its breath, like time had paused. "I've never seen Denzel like that before." And Trey, he didn't just speak to him, he spoke to all of us. The clip gained millions of views before the night was even over. But for those in the room, no screen could capture the depth of what they had just witnessed. Later that evening, after most of the audience had left, Denzel asked for a private moment with President Traoré. They met in a small backstage room away from cameras and bright lights. Denzel sat forward, elbows on his knees, eyes still wet. "Mr. President," he began slowly, "I've heard countless speeches in my life, but yours tonight, it broke me in the best." "Way, Traoré," with humility, shook his head. "Brother, I didn't come to break you. I came to remind you, and all of us, that even giants need rest." Denzel chuckled softly through the tears. "You're wise beyond your years. People see me as strong, but inside I've been tired. Tired of carrying so much." Trey leaned closer. "Then let others carry you sometimes. Even the strongest trees lean on. The forest." Those words struck Denzel like lightning. He whispered almost to himself, "Maybe tonight I finally learned that." By the next morning, the world was ablaze with the story. News outlets replayed the moment on loop. Social media overflowed with hashtags like Denzel and Trey and Truth and Connection. One viral post read, "This isn't just a tribute. This is history, a president and a legend, reminding us that vulnerability is not weakness, it's humanity." Even people who had never followed African politics were suddenly learning about Ibrahim Traoré, the young president from Burkina Faso. Many praised his humility and strength, calling him a leader of the people. Meanwhile, Denzel released a short statement. "What I experienced last night reminded me of the power of truth. I am grateful to President Traoré, not just for his words, but for his heart." The world leaned in, eager to know what would happen next. And behind the headlines, both men prepared for a follow-up meeting that would surprise everyone. The week was far from over. On the third night after the tribute, Denzel received an envelope slipped quietly under his hotel door. There was no name written outside, just a single word, "Brother." Inside was a handwritten note from President Ibrahim Traoré. The words were simple, yet heavy with truth. "You have inspired millions through your art. But what inspires the world most is not what you act. It is who you are. Do not hide your humanity." Denzel sat on the edge of his bed, reading the words over and over. His throat tightened. For years, he had carried the burden of always being the strong one, the unshakable one. Now, this young leader from Burkina Faso was telling him it was okay to lay that burden down. A small tear slid down his cheek as he whispered, "Maybe it's time I stop pretending." What Denzel didn't know was that this letter would soon find its way to the public and move millions more. The next morning, before the sun rose, Denzel dialed Traoré's number. He hesitated before pressing call, but something inside urged him on. When the line connected, Traoré answered softly, "Good morning, Brother Denzel." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence carried more weight than words. Finally, Denzel broke it. "You've given me more in 3 days than I found in years of searching." Traoré's voice was calm, steady. "That's because it wasn't me. It was truth. Truth has a way of breaking chains we don't even know we were." Denzel's breath shook. "Do you realize? What you've done, the world sees me as unshakable. But you reminded me that even I am allowed to feel." Traoré smiled through the line. "The strongest man is not the one who never cries. It's the one who cries, but still stands." Unbeknownst to them, this call would soon be leaked, and the world would listen in awe. By the afternoon, clips from their private call had mysteriously surfaced online. At first, Denzel was furious. This was never meant for the world. But as he scrolled through the comments, his anger melted into something else. "Hearing Denzel like this makes me cry. Thank you, Traoré, for reminding us all of our humanity. This is the most powerful conversation I've ever heard. Two men from different worlds, united by truth. If only more leaders spoke like Traoré, the world would be different." The internet was ablaze. Hashtags trended across continents. Millions admitted they had never cried at a phone call before, but this one had undone them. That evening, Denzel called Traoré again, his voice lighter this time. "Brother, the world heard us," Traoré replied softly. "Then maybe the world was meant to." The week was building to something no one could have predicted. The hall was filled with dignitaries, leaders, and artists from around the world. Cameras flashed, but no one dared to move. As President Ibrahim Traoré stood behind the podium, his voice, calm yet heavy with truth, carried through the silence. He spoke of dignity, of nations too long silenced, of children who still dream despite hunger, and of a continent that refuses to bow. Denzel Washington sat in the front row. First, he held his usual steady composure, nodding thoughtfully. But then Traoré's words shifted. "Strength," Traoré said, his voice almost breaking, "is not in how loud we shout, but in how much pain we can carry without losing our humanity." Those words struck Denzel like a blow. He leaned back, blinking fast, but the tears came anyway. The hall noticed, but no one judged. Instead, they felt it too. Cameras zoomed in. The world saw a man known for strength, undone by the raw honesty of a young African leader. And for the first time in his long career, Denzel had no script, only silence and tears. When the event ended, people rushed to shake Traoré's hand. Denzel stayed seated, gathering himself. Finally he stood and approached the young president. The two men met away from the crowd, near the side of the stage. "Mr. President," Denzel whispered, his voice trembling, "I've heard many speeches in my life, but this one, it broke me. You didn't just speak to leaders, you spoke to souls." Ibrahim Traoré placed a hand on Denzel's shoulder. "I only spoke the truth," he said softly. "But the truth is heavier when carried. Alone, thank you for carrying it with me today." The actor closed his eyes, and a tear slipped down. The world needed to hear that. I needed to hear that. Their exchange was brief, but a photo caught the moment. Two men, heads bowed together. One, a veteran actor, the other a young leader, bound by something greater than fame or politics, human truth. That photo spread like wildfire online. Millions who had never heard of Traoré suddenly knew his name. By the end of the week, the world was still talking. News anchors replayed the speech. Social media overflowed with clips of Denzel wiping his tears with captions like "Authenticity is power." Children in Burkina Faso proudly shared videos saying, "That's our president." In America, families sat together watching, and even in distant corners of the world, people felt connected. Denzel later admitted in an interview, his voice still shaking, "I've played many roles, but what President Traoré gave me wasn't a role. It was a reminder that truth heals, that dignity matters, and that we're all connected." In just 7 days, a young African leader had touched millions of hearts, not with weapons, not with money, but with sincerity. And in that week, the world didn't just see a president, they saw hope. As the camera faded out, a quiet message appeared on the screen. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share your thoughts in the comments.